and welcome to healthyhouseplants.com, where we teach you all about gardening in the great indoors. If you'd like to support our show, please use our Amazon affiliate link below. Today, a plant care video on Monstera adansonii. This is sometimes called the Swiss cheese plant for all the little holes that you see in the leaves, or kind of like cuts. Those are actually called fenestrations, and there are reasons for them. As happens with all plants, they have reasons for their look, even though there's some that we happen to really like the look of, which works out really well when you're growing them indoors. So the Monstera adansonii, it's a very easy to grow, fast growing house plant. As you can see, it has exotic, eye-catching, heart-shaped foliage filled with those beautiful holes, native to Central and South America. And those fenestrations, as mentioned, those holes are called fenestrations. A lot of them are oval shaped. These holes are thought to allow sun and water through to the lower leaves in the tropical environments where they are native to. So they grow in the jungles, they grow up into trees and reach for the light that is way up there. So these holes, what happens with the holes in the leaves is the light that is able to filter through those fenestrations and get to the lower part of the plant as well. They are also thought to help the leaves stand up to any kind of wind, so that because the wind would just rush through the holes. This plant is meant to climb, and when given a trellis or a moss pole, as you see this plant is on a moss pole, it's attached to a moss pole, then it will grow very nicely that way. It looks nice that way. Otherwise, it tends to drape kind of all over the place onto the floor and that sort of thing. So it is better to put it on a moss pole. The moss pole, I will talk a little bit more about in a second during the various care elements as well. It's an important part of growing them. There is a Monstera known as obliqua, and it sort of looks like this plant. It's extremely rare. It has very thin foliage and has much larger holes in the leaves, much larger fenestrations in the leaves. And it is, if you see one of those, do take a cutting if the person allows it, because that is a sought after plant. It's actually kind of a strange looking plant. I'm going to put a picture of one here so you can see the difference there. And so if you spot one, I find this plant, going back to this plant now, you saw the picture. This plant I find to be more attractive personally. So how to keep this beautiful plant growing really well for you. And this plant, by the way, is in a revitalization series as well and was recently potted up. Okay, so lighting. It needs medium to bright indirect light, although it will take a little lower light. In its native habitat, remembering, and I always suggest that people think and look into how the plants they're growing grow in their native habitat, because what you want to do is you want to give the plant the same sort of environment as much as possible in your indoor garden. Obviously, we can't do torrential downpours in terms of rain or the 100% humidity, but getting as close as you can to that with the plant is very helpful. So a medium to bright but indirect light, so generally not in front, it wouldn't be in front of a southern window, a western window. Those are going to be way too bright, would burn the leaves. Do watch out for the eastern window, but eastern window could be possible. Northern windows are fine because the light coming from them tends to be not very bright at all. If you're on a northwest corner, that one can actually work nicely because as long as it's not too close to the western window, but on the north window, and then you've got some west window coming in, that gives you that indirect bright light. They also do very well under full spectrum lighting, so that's another option that you can also do for your plants. When you do, just make sure to get the full spectrum light as close as possible to the plant, preferably above the plant. Whenever you're using full spectrum lighting, it's best to have the full spectrum lighting coming from above as the sun would, but it's okay to also coming from the sides if that's all you can do. Better to have some light than none at all. So the watering is next. So keep the soil moist but not soggy. The best way you want to emulate, basically what you're trying to do is emulate the moisture in the jungle where the plants are native to. So this could be watering once a week. It could be watering more frequently depending on your climate, depending on the time of year as well. So just keep a good eye on it. When the first ½ inch to inch is dry, it's time to water. You can pick up the pot, especially if it's in a plastic pot. This one isn't, but that'll give you an indication if it's time to water. And even the glazed ceramic pots like this, you'll know when a plant, once you've watered a plant, how heavy it is compared to when it's time to water again. Use a moisture meter. That's always a really good tool too. So you want, when the moisture meter is on the 4, it's a good time to water it. So, and when watering, make sure that the water comes out the drainage holes. Now, if the leaves get discolored, if they start to turn a little yellowy, this is an indication that your houseplant may be getting too much water. So the houseplant, meaning this plant, and actually other plants as well. So that's something to keep in mind. As mentioned, you do not want soggy soil, but you want soil on the moist side. Humidity for this plant. As mentioned, they are jungle plants and they do flourish in a high humidity environment. This is where the moss pole helps with that. So I'm going to talk about the moss pole here too for a moment. So that has sphagnum moss on it, which will retain moisture if you mist it on a regular basis, and that will give the plant some extra humidity. You can also put the plant on a humidity tray, put it in a more humid area of the house, such as the bathroom, where it gets humidity off and on. Misting a few times a day also will help. So if you have the plant maybe in an area where you are often, you could put a mister next to it and go ahead and mist and tell other people to mist as well. And it needs to be a fine mist. So you don't want to be watering it, basically big sprays of water, but a fine mist to simulate the mist that you would have in the rainforest. Also consider that plants humidify each other, so the more plants you have in your houseplant collection, the more the humidity you will have in your air. So grow your this Monstera next to another Monstera or next to some other plants. All plants, what they do is they transpire, so they emit moisture into the air. As they do that, they humidify one another and they provide moisture in the air for us humans, which makes the air more pleasant. And now, of course, if you're in a very humid climate, then you're not going to have to worry about that. But I'm talking more for people that have more of a struggle with the humidity. You really want the humidity level to ideally be 50% or higher with this plant. If it goes lower than that, you are going to have problems with brown leaf tips and the plant just kind of struggling. So these other little things that I'm mentioning will help push the humidity up some. And you can also use a humidifier with these plants. They love that. And I do have a video on using a humidifier, and any videos I mention in here I will be linking below. So temperature. You can probably guess that this plant doesn't do well in colder temperatures. So being from the regions of the world that the plant is, 64 to 81 degrees Fahrenheit is ideal. And that is something that most homes usually you can accomplish. So if it is if you're in a cooler climate, try to find the warmer area of the house. If you're in a very hot climate, then Usually they're going to be okay with that, but if it's very dry and very hot, then you have more of a problem with the humidity, so you will want to keep an eye on that. And then if, say, you are in an area where it's dry and hot, but you're in an air-conditioned home, that works. Just make sure not to have the plant near any vents where the air will be flowing onto it and could dry the plant out. So I'm going to go to the moss pole now that I've mentioned it a few times. So the moss pole is great for staking the plants because these plants like to grow up. That's how they grow naturally in the jungles. As mentioned, they grow up into the trees. So you are simulating that by putting in a moss pole. You can find moss poles online. You can also make your own. I'll probably be doing a video in the future on making your own. However, I will be linking down below where you can find some, including the moss pole that this one is on. They make them very tall, so once your plant gets bigger and bigger, which hopefully it will do with as you follow all the good growing tips for it, then you can get an even bigger one and attach it at that point. As mentioned, you want to mist it. That will give the plant more moisture. It will also cause the plant to attach its its vines and also its aerial roots to the pole. I have a video on aerial roots and what they are on the Monsteras. And what they are is, as they sound like, aerial roots, air roots. They generally are gray or brown in color. Often on the Monsteras, they are a browny color. And those you can also attach to the pole, and they will attach themselves as well. And those are generally, when the plants are growing in the jungle, what they use to continue to grow up. And those roots, as well as the vines, but they will both be growing upwards. And what those roots are doing, the aerial roots are doing, is they are absorbing liquid, so moisture from the air, as well as nutrients. So that's another great thing about this is those when you do get those, and they generally come on older plants. When you do, this plant has a few not on it, but it's going to get, as it grows, it will get a lot more on it. So it's good to also wind those up the moss pole as well. These plants are epiphytic, meaning that they grow on they use other plants to grow on. So those aerial roots are what make the plants epiphytic. Those aerial roots are absorbing moisture and water, and obviously in rainstorms they're going to absorb a lot. So you can also spray those when you are spraying your moss pole. So many good reasons to put the moss pole in. When it's time to change the moss pole, often the easier way to do it is when you're potting up, to put a bigger moss pole in at that point. Okay, so fertilizing. So these plants are fast growers. Generally speaking, when you have a fast growing plant, it's going to need a lot of fertilizer, or I shouldn't say a lot of fertilizer, I should say more frequent fertilizing. So I suggest fertilizing this plant on a monthly basis. I do have a fertilizer product that I put in, especially when I'm repotting, and then there's some good liquid ones that you can also add on a monthly basis at one point when watering. So I'll put some links below for that too. So I suggest organic. If it's not organic, you may get some leaf tip burn on your plants, which doesn't look that great, especially when these leaves start to get bigger and they're very stunning leaves, and then you've got these leaf tips that are burnt. You can cut them off, but ideally just trying to stay away from things like the chemical fertilizers that will do the burning. So look for a organic fertilizer. Okay, soil. So the soil you want to use is be moisture retentive but well draining. So what I use is a ProMix BX. I'll put a link below for that, and another soil that I like. I'm going to be doing a video in the future also on making your own soil. So the soil should have something that is water retentive in it, like peat moss or coir. If it is soil that looks like ground up bark, do not use that on this plant. This plant it will not retain enough moisture. Those ground up bark soils are better used as mulch. They are just not very useful for houseplants. And unfortunately, there are quite a few of them on the market. Okay, so as mentioned, well draining, but at the same time, moisture retentive. So something that also has some perlite in it, or you can add pumice, which will help with the drainage as well. And I have a pumice product I'll link below too. Okay, so pruning and staking, we've talked quite a bit about, and so you know you can attach the vines to it with green garden tape, and that will stretch with the plant. When you do attach, don't attach too tightly. Give it a little wiggle room to grow, but the green garden tape will stretch with the plant as it grows. So that's one reason why I suggest, one of the main reasons why I suggest using that as well. When pruning, you want to prune if the plant gets a little unwieldy, you can prune, or you can just continue to wind it up into the moss pole, and it will get fuller at that time. If you do get a long vine on there that doesn't have a lot of leaves on it, what you want to do to make that part of the plant bushier is to prune right above a leaf node. So that will be where there is an existing leaf or where there is a bump where a leaf was, and that will cause that part of the plant to become bushier. So that's something you can easily do. And when you do prune back this plant or any plant, don't prune back by more than 1/3 or even 25%. That could shock the plant, and then it could do poorly after that. The pests and diseases for this plant, they can occasionally get some scale and mealy bugs. They could also get spider mites, but if you're getting spider mites on this plant, your conditions are way too dry, because spider mites love dry conditions. As far as the scale and mealy bugs, you do want to get them under control as soon as possible so they don't take over. I do have videos on both of those, and continually adding to my pest playlist. So something you can spray for both of them is isopropyl alcohol, and you can also use neem oil on them as well. So best to just check them on a regular basis and then get anything like that under control as soon as possible. And keeping in mind, if you're growing the plant in the right location, giving it the right amount of water, fertilizing regularly, it has some support to grow on, and it's overall happy plant, it's going to be much less likely to succumb to pests and diseases. It's weakened plants that generally succumb to pests and diseases, but any plant can get them, so it's good to keep an eye out. So there you go for how to care for this beauty. I love this plant. Thank you for stopping by today. Please leave any comments about any indoor gardening tutorials you'd like to see. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. And please check the bell if you'd like to be notified when new videos are released.